Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to this one of our webinar series. If you haven't come across Listen and Learn Research before, welcome. Our job, or the reason we exist, is really to help people think better and to help them think more strategically and to help them think more creatively, to help them innovate. We think that in a world where we have so much data, it shouldn't be so difficult to find the insight that you need. And yet we hear over time and time again the amount of uncertainty that people still face. No much more so than when we come to think about sustainability. And actually, as brands, what's our role and what's our responsibility? And there are two questions for our talk today. One is a sort of a broader, how do we talk to consumers about sustainability? And I believe that as brands, it is our responsibility. I think the buck stops with us for a number of reasons, which we'll get onto. And then the other really important question, which is what we get asked a lot, is this one around, will consumers pay more? Which I think is fascinating, but I think it's the wrong question. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to try and run to about half an hour today. Again, apologies for being a bit late. We're going to run through some findings of some work that we've done. There is a report that goes with this, which goes into things in a lot more detail. So please, if that's interesting, if you've enjoyed or found interesting any of the things that we talk about today, drop us a line and we'll be happy to share that with you. Okay. So what I want to go through today is just a bunch of ideas. The first one is this idea that consumer attitudes to sustainability are diverse and complex. There's no one green consumer or sustainable consumer or non-sustainable consumer. It is a complex issue, and we can't just hope that a one-size-fits-all response is going to work. The market size for sustainability options, I don't think, is going to be anywhere big as we might hope it is right now. Work needs to be done on this market to build it and create it, which I think is a core message if we think about this question: are consumers willing to pay more? Maybe, but it is an important question. But at the moment, our view is the mainstream are unlikely to fund the development of sustainable goods and services. And we'll come into that and talk a bit about that through this deck. And unless something really radical changes in terms of legislation, shifts in cultural norms, it's going to be up to the supply side to really move the dial on here. And so that comes to us. I think companies have a moral and a commercial opportunity to act first and define the market. Look, there are early adopters in this space like Patagonia and the brands that we all know and love that are leading the way on this. So it's proven and it's tested. But I think it's the mainstream brands who have mainstream appeal that's the opportunity and that's the challenge that we have right now. And obviously, I believe that understanding consumer behaviour is going to be absolutely fundamental to knowing how and where to act. So that's the plan for today. Look, let's think about climate change. I think the question I think about to myself is like, who's the real villain when we think about climate change? Because the reports that have come out, there's absolutely no room for doubt, right? There's no room for maneuver. It's in terms of the science, it's very, very clear. Climate change is happening and it's our fault. So we think back to when the last IPCC report landed, it was across the front page everywhere. And then the next day, really nothing. And that really is part of the problem, I think, and reflected in most media, is the fact that it's a really big emotional issue one day, but it's just not sticky. It's too kind of emotional. It flips away. It's replaced with the next thing on the news cycle. So we have these sort of like residual feelings of guilt and worry and anxiety when we hear the news, when we're forced to think about it. But those quickly get pushed aside. And then we just got this guilt, residing guilt. And to be honest, it's like if I had put my hand up, or asked the question, put your hands up, who likes being told off? I don't think anyone really does. But that is really the dominant narrative of climate change at the moment. We're trying to affect change by telling people off. And I know from my own children that that's a futile thing to try and do. It just doesn't work. And what we're seeing is that behaviour change isn't happening fast enough. The people that need to change, we're only using this really blunt instrument of trying to tell them off. And that's got to change. I really think the problem here is because this way of thinking assumes that climate change here is the villain of this story. Where for I think actually the real villain in this story is helplessness. We've got to get out of this negative loop. And when people feel about climate change, they can feel really helpless when they start thinking about it. And what happens is when you start feeling helpless, this uncertainty saps energy, so nothing happens. And this is the real tragedy that we've got. And it becomes a really destructive loop. We see something in the news, we get upset about it, we get angry, we get motivated by it, but then it flips into, okay, what can I do about it? And I'm being told off. And it flips into this, right, I don't know what to do next, so nothing happens. And it goes back to the beginning. But we know from a bunch of research that we've done that when people are shown what they can do, it actually makes them feel a lot better. And it can be something really small, but these are the things that you build on. And so when individuals are seen to work towards a shared goal, we know that really big things can happen and they can feel a lot better about it. It's a small change that then leads into reinforcing behavior. And this leads me to this analogy that we need to be more B. We need to coordinate, do more smaller things. We need to kind of recognize the power of small changes when enacted on a mass scale. We need to create this positive reinforcing process of change. And I say we, and it's obvious here that I'm talking about brands. I'm talking about brands that have got the courage and the foresight to think and to have a vision and to push that vision forward. Because bees need a queen. We need to be led. We need to be shown how to do it, because otherwise we have not the power initially to do it on ourselves. It's not right to think or expect people who lack motivation, ability, and awareness to change their behavior just because they're told to. Okay, it doesn't work. It's obvious that it doesn't work. We need something more than this. For most people, the beliefs of a passionate few aren't enough to change their behavior. If it was, we would all be buying Patagonia, and we're not. So we need something else. What is it that we can do? Well, I think that what we need to do is to break it down into much more manageable parts. And the way that we do this is, let's look to those who are really passionate about it, because the passionate people are going to be the ones that are paving the way. And the innovation pilots, they're the early adopters. And early adopters are people who work out how stuff happens. Then the challenge is to make that really simple so the mainstream who don't care and don't have that energy, but do want to do something towards it, can move. But we've got to accept that the path of the early adopters simply won't work for the majority. We can't all be Greta. We can't all follow and have that same passion, because it's too complex, it's too time consuming, and it's too hard. This is a thing which is competing against taking the kids to school, cooking dinner, doing your day job, all of the other things that we've got on our mind. And when I lay it out like that, you might say, but Jeremy, climate change is really important. And I'm not denying that. I'm just saying that if we all felt passionately about it, we wouldn't be having this meeting today. The situation would be solved. The reason that we are having this conversation today is because the mainstream aren't motivated, aren't moving quickly enough to make the changes that we need. So I think we need baby steps. We need to see what works, see why, and then replicate that in the best way possible. So thinking about where we should focus our efforts, if we think that, hey, that time is not on our side and we're going to need to prioritize, and like many things, there's a beautiful Goldilocks zone that we need to find. So if you think about where people are in their motivation and ability to act, and I've taken a lot of these kind of ideas about motivation and habits from Tiny Habits by PJ Fogg, which is a superb book. It talks about motivation, ability, and prompt as the ways that we change behavior. So if we think about our motivation and our ability on this scale of low on one side and high to the other, where are we going to focus on this scale? Well, I believe there are a bunch of people that are just too cold. Okay, they don't believe in climate change, or they don't believe that humans are responsible for it. And right now, that group's too resistant to change in the short term. There's another group, and they're too hot. Look, they've got it. We don't need to do anything with that group because they're already really highly engaged and motivated. They're brilliant. They're just over there. It's this bunch in the middle who are just right. It's a bunch of people that believe in climate change and are trying to find their way through the maze to act in a more sustainable way. And it's that group that I think have got the most potential to change behavior in the short to medium term. Becoming more sustainable as a consumer doesn't happen overnight. And it's a real mistake to think that the shift is binary. I'm not saying we wake up one morning and all of a sudden I'm 100% sustainable, a paragon of virtue. We know that that's not right. Okay, so there are many shades of green. And in the full report, we go through all of this detail. Today, I'm going to concentrate on the ones that I think are the most important. But again, here's our motivation and ability to act scale. Our first group, right, the realize. Here, people have just realized that their carbon footprint is contributing to the climate crisis. And maybe, just maybe, they should do something to lessen their impact. We've got to realize that lots of people are still here, okay? The second group, slightly more motivated, slightly more able, slightly more engaged. Here, they're showing willingness to do things that are within easy reach. Like these are the things that they can do without real compromise on quality or service and price. It's kind of like your Tesla buyers. My belief is that 1 and 2 are the mainstream market at the moment, and that the 3, 4, and 5 are actually much smaller niche areas of the market. So the understanding 1 and 2s are super, super important. Our 3s, right? This level of engagement requires more effort because this level of engagement is around sacrifice. It's realizing that actually, if you want to lead a more sustainable life, you're going to have to do with less of what you're used to doing. And that's the way forward. And so this is a real fundamental shift of the 2s are all about yeah, I'll spend more, I'll spend different, but I still want the same. The threes were going, right, if this is the way that I'm going to be, I'm going to need to cut my travel. I need to not buy. It's that sacrifice. It's where that bigger, stronger level of commitment comes in. Our fours are great. And Mike, our sort of head of research, is a definite four and gently trying to influence the rest of us. I'm probably a two. I wish I was a three, but I'm probably a two. The fours, like, there's no turning back from this level of engagement. It's like they're fully addressed their environmental impact. They're actively changed lots of their life. This is people who are very, very active. You're likely to find the vegans here. You're likely to find lots of people who are very, very considered about their behavior and their consumption and what that means in terms of eliminating their environmental impact. We've got this group, they're likely to be trying to influence people at an individual level, which then brings us on to number five, which are those people who feel the same as number four, but actually they're really passionate. They're taking it to the streets. They're much more likely to become involved in kind of like broader group level initiatives. So this is our scale from realize through to evangelize. As I said, 1 and 2s are where the volume is right now. The 3s, the 4s and the 5s, they can lead the way, but it's the 1s and the 2s that need direction. They need help to cross the bridge, to help them move on that journey. Let's have a little look at some of these in a little bit more detail. I won't go into huge amounts because it's in the deck, but I want to sort of introduce you to a few personas in a little bit more. So our number ones, okay, let's see if you recognize yourself in any of these. I love this quote, kind of like, I'm eating a mango on the coldest day of the year, and now I'm feeling conflicted about climate change for the first time in my life. It's this point of recognition, all right? It's this idea that they're slowly getting their heads around it. And so Mandy is our pen portrait, has just noticed that people around her seem to be thinking about and talking about climate change. Like, she's seeing, when she goes shopping, she's seeing that how she buys and what she can buy is starting to change. So she can't get plastic bags anymore. She's starting to experience different things. So she's saying her niece just got a job at a vegan place and she's raving about the food. She's noticed her neighbor starting to cycle a lot more. She's starting to see these programs on Netflix. All of these different signals are starting to become a little bit more salient, a little bit more front of mind for her. It's just slowly, what was ignored before is slowly bubbling around their consciousness and starting to be part of the everyday thought. She's starting to sort of think about how she recycles and noticing how other people are behaving. She's thinking about just conscious choices about where the food comes from and starting to feel a bit guilty that maybe she shouldn't be eating things that have spent so much time on a boat trying to get to her. They're thinking about, what have they got? Do they need to buy new things? All of these signals are just starting to make her curious and make them wonder about what they do as their life. There's no real action here, but it's all about that slow building awareness of their place in society, their place in and their environmental impact and what that means. Then we get on to sort of our redirect, and this is, as I said, about shifting their focus. So this is we called our hard to change Harry. And this is the people who have kind of like, they've bought a gas guzzling they've swapped their BMW for a Lexus, but it probably wasn't the main reason. So there's a quote here, I have to admit, getting a Tesla was not primarily for its green properties. Remember, we're not in the sacrifice zone here. We're very much in the shifting purchases because of these motivations. So we've got things here. It's like they might have bought a Tesla because it makes them feel hip. It makes them feel it's a conversation point. It's an eye stopper. When they're going to sort of thinking about what they buy, they might experiment with different goods. An example here, they might have just bought like a bar shampoo rather than what they used to have got. They might be going to see a concert and they might try public transportation for the first time. They might actually then experience that worked quite well. So we're getting this group, this persona, this group of people are experimenting. They're trying. They're not doing a lot, but they're doing small different things and then experiencing that. And it's kind of feeding back into this sort of positive feedback loop a little bit. They're exposed to people who are growing their own vegetables. They're going to farmers markets. They're thinking about purchasing locally. So it's a shift in these decisions away from just that kind of idea that it might be nice or kind of idea that it's wrong into some of this kind of like low level action. Again, no sacrifice. So here when they're thinking about booking flights to go skiing, they notice that there might be a carbon offset program, but wow, at that price, he's not going to quite do that. Not ready to not go, not ready to offset, but still making small changes as it moves along. And then the next one I want to talk about is really just this idea of reduce, which can be summed up as this idea of the path to less. And this is where sacrifice comes in. It's this idea that we're not going to buy our way through this crisis, and the fact that our behaviors need to change substantially. So this, we've got Charlotte cog in the wheel. And this is it can be quite a lonely group to be in, because you've made a choice which is probably quite different from those around you. And you've made a choice which is counter-consumerist to a degree. So here we've got people who may see themselves as kind of like a tiny cog in the wheel, but they are doing their part. They're making sacrifices, even if they're not entirely sure it's going to make a huge difference, which is then really interesting, because you've got this idea of this massive problem, and there's like an ant facing a mountain. It's like, what can they possibly do? Well, it's one step at a time, and it's connecting people who are all taking those one steps at a time. So here it's about making choices about being too hot rather than using the air conditioner. It's about noticing actual more significant impacts of climate change. Counting, like realizing the fire hazards from out hiking, realizing how long it's been since we had some proper rain. She's talking about people she's meeting. It's like all her friends are sort of moving in this direction as well. She's not really sure. She may have actually decided to go completely vegan, and she's not sure whether she's going to save the world, but she is making this really conscious effort to do something which is requiring a sacrifice on her part. She's biking to work rather than taking a train or driving. She's noticing that the infrastructure is not the best, but she's finding the way. And this all, again, sacrifice, finding the way. And for example, in this example, she's refused to buy or to think about the new iPhone that's coming out, and she's going to run her iPhone 10 for as long as possible. It still gets the job done, and as long as it can keep going and the apps support it, she's going to do that. Again, this choice not to buy. She started bringing water in reusable, eco-friendly stainless bottles to the gym. She feels a bit guilty about plastic uses, but it fits into the image she wants to do, and she's prepared to make that. And again, this sort of abiding sense that she's still not sure that anything she's doing is making an impact. And again, that's interesting for us, because the messaging that brands need to do to these people or these different groups is remarkably different across. As I said, the other personas are in the deck, but we're thinking about, as I talked earlier about this move towards a more engaged, and look, we're not all going to be fours, we're not all going to be fives, but we really got to be more than ones and twos. So our ones are realizes their climate consciousness is awakened, but they lack the ability to make changes. So what we do for this audience is we give them examples, we give them clear, consistent advice, we give them small steps, we sort of encourage and recognize what they're doing. Our twos, right? They're starting to make different, greener purchase choices. They're buying different, but they're not making sacrifices. They're not ready yet. They're not quite there. So again, how do we help them become more engaged? We show them examples again, and we encourage them, and we give them the tools to track their impact. We provide them with a roadmap. These are the people that are making choices. So if we help them understand the consequences of their choices, that's what's going to help. When we get into our reduces, where are they? Look, these people are happy to live with less and avoid unnecessary purchases. So they're consciously reducing their travel, energy, and their consumption. And for this group, it's about letting them know their sacrifices matter, help them connect and form communities, and provide opportunities for them to do more. Okay, so we've gone through sort of some personas, outlined some of the challenge. What's next? What can we do to help people make better choices? It's time for leadership, I think, right? Businesses are the ones that are going to make the difference. If we accept the fact that life is going to be different in 5 to 10 years, I think many businesses are already making significant investments to make the supply chains and products more sustainable. But this is slow going, and it needs to be quicker, and it needs to be broader. One of the issues that we have is a lack of active consumer demand. So that's where the question, will people pay more, comes from. Because we're scared about investing, because we want to get that investment back in the premium. From what I can see right now, we've got too many worried people and not enough action. So what we're doing is we're asking people to do this sort of take a Kevin Costner Field of Dreams leap of faith and build it in the hope that they will come, which is really risky. So this is where the situation that brands are at the moment. It's really difficult. I don't envy people who need to make substantial investment choices based on the data that we have so far. But I really think it's a Toys R Us versus e-commerce moment. And we know how that story played out. We know the future will be different, so the time to act is now. We need to make sure we need to make the investment process less risky by stimulating demand. So the challenge here is to align what brands are doing to the needs of the level 1 and the level 2 consumers, because that's where the main market, that's where the mass market is. And we need a simpler way to grow these sort of fragile sparks of interest. I know, and I feel quite passionate about this, that telling people off doesn't work as a motivating tool. It just doesn't. People look there, they hang their head in shame, and then they carry on with their behavior. So we need to be better than that. We need to be more creative. We need to create opportunities for small changes in behavior and that are going to create a positive feedback loop. That's how brands take leadership of an emerging market. We can keep it simple. We reinforce the good behaviors. We show people what they're doing and how it works. That's how we build momentum, and that momentum turns into demand, which then de-risks some of the investment. So, right, how do we do that? So the question is like, how can we help mainstream consumers take the first and then subsequent steps to become more sustainable? And as I said, I think it's all about making small, better choices. Look, we've got some examples to start thinking about it. And this is up to you guys, right? You know your business. You know how you can brainstorm some of these things. But instead of starting, right, we need this massive agenda, think about the small steps that you can make to help consumers make better decisions. So labeling is really interesting, right? There's a bunch of research going on around it. Look, find the lowest common denominator of consumer understanding and then use it. So I found this an interesting idea of walking around the supermarket and going, right, how far has this apple come versus this pear versus this banana versus this mango? Because I stopped buying mangoes after I read that quote, because it just makes my head explode thinking about how far it's gone. And this is difficult because there's rights and wrongs about all of this. That's why the science also needs to be clear and simple. But think about it. If you were to use like a traffic light system on the calorie counting system that we use on food today, but you just did an air miles version, see if it changes consumer demand. And if it does do, then double down on that, experiment more, see what you can do. What you want to do is try and find an experiment through labeling or through other ways, which is going to let consumers tell you that they're interested, that they're willing to make that change. So if you find that your pear buying goes up at the expense of your mangoes, then that's a really interesting experiment. If it doesn't, then that's also experimental. It's really interesting. It tells you where the market is and what your challenge is. And the idea here is that this is a really challenging one, right? Profit is drives every business, but it's about the time frame of your profit. And if I use an analogy here of a Formula One race, which is often won by kind of making a really bold tyre choice a few tyres before your competitors, and you need to hold your nerve and change your tyres at the right point, because if you get it at the right point, you win. And the mainstream doesn't care enough to pay more, really. They don't believe enough to make a sacrifice. So you have to change the tyres for them. Other things that we can do is we can think about standards. Right, the mainstream is confused, and we know that confusion and uncertainty saps energy, and we need energy because energy drives behavior. So any sense of incredulity or uncertainty is going to take that energy away further, and they'll just go back to what they know, because they are not early adopters. These are mainstream consumers who don't care enough about what we're doing now to make a sacrifice. We have to make that path for them. So what we need are business processes that are going to support their end goal. We're asking that their end goal that we're asking them to believe in. Everything doesn't have to be perfect, right? Consumers don't need that. They just need the path. They need a journey. They need guidance. And this is what I talk about by I mean leadership is required now, right? We need to stand up and say, right, we're going to try and find a way. I understand you're uncertain, but this is the steps that we're going to take on towards this path together. And look, I think the idea of getting some feedback here is really important. You can create a sense of community with your customers. You can listen to what they need, listen to the voices of your early adopters. And it's these voices that are going to help you de-risk the investment process by giving you really valuable feedback as you go through. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up now. Okay, so we talked about the opportunity here. So consumer attitudes to sustainability are diverse and complex. We've got a range of behaviors. We've got either ends of that. We've got those people who just aren't worth the effort right now, right? Just change the world around them, and then that's where you'll change their behavior. They're laggards in this regard. We want that middle section, that Goldilocks section there, where there's interest. If there's interest and awareness, we can do something with that as brand owners and organizations. That's a hook for us to work with. Unfortunately, the market size for sustainable options right now is probably not as large as you might hope or think or wish, which is a real shame. And I wish it was different, because if it was different, it would be great. You could make those investment decisions easily, couldn't you? But it's not. And we have to accept the fact that it's not, and we have to show leadership even though it's not, which means that we'll make mistakes, which means it won't be quite as profitable as we might want it to be. But if we're committed to a longer term future, that's kind of where we need to go, right? I'm always interested in businesses that take chunks out of other businesses. And I love the detergent brand Smol, who are ex-Unilever, and set up just a different model. If you haven't come across them at all, have a look. It's awesome. And their idea is, right, we ship water and we ship plastic bottles around in insane amounts for like our cleaning fluid. And so if we just sent tablets and some reusable bottles to people, all that water and all the bottles that aren't reused, all of that disappears from the supply chain. That's a really simple idea. And they were able to do it and get the backing and set it all up. And small startups can take chunks of revenue from large established businesses if they're not careful and they're not watching what's going on. So it can't be too late to this party. Unless something really radical changes, like the government suddenly goes, right, let's do this, or there's some other really big shift in culture and how we view the world, which is really, really unlikely. Those things I can't think of an example. It's going to have to be supply side. It's going to have to be brands. You have that supply side power. You are the people that can say, right, we can change this, we can evolve that, we can be creative. And I believe that, I talk about this from the heart, but I do believe that companies have a moral obligation and a real commercial opportunity to act first, because that's how you're going to define the market. In a world that needs leadership and that has an idea, that's where we stand up and take control. And understanding consumer behavior all through that process is going to be really key to knowing how and where to act. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, I've scupped through what's quite a complex piece of work quite quickly. Love to have a chat with you about it at all. Got any time to drop questions in the chat now, or would love to pick this up with you at a later point. Thanks so much.